The summer of 1944 was a turning point in the Second World War, and few commanders embodied the ferocity and ambition of the Allied advance like General George S. Patton. Known for his flamboyant personality, blistering pace, and unorthodox strategies, Patton had transformed the Third Army into a force that seemed unstoppable. As the sun rose over the fields of Normandy, Patton's troops were already pushing forward at speeds that confounded both the Germans and their own allies. Behind him, tanks roared like thunder across the French countryside. Infantry followed with relentless determination, and supply lines struggled to keep up with the sheer velocity of movement. Every crossing of a river, every liberated town was not just a tactical victory, it was a statement. Patton wanted the world to know that the Third Army was a machine of precision and power, a testament to his genius as a commander. Yet, even amid this momentum, Patton faced a subtle but growing frustration. While his units were smashing through German defenses and capturing key positions faster than anyone had predicted, recognition did not come as he expected. Allied high command and the press seemed captivated by the methodical, carefully planned successes of British forces under General Bernard Montgomery. Montgomery's victories, slower and more calculated, were receiving disproportionate attention, and supplies were often rerouted to support British operations, leaving Patton to push his army with what seemed like endless ingenuity and improvisation. The contrast could not have been sharper. Patton's men were winning battles, but Montgomery was collecting the accolades. This tension simmered beneath the surface as Patton's Third Army raced across northern France. Every day brought a new set of challenges. Bridges had to be secured or improvised, towns cleared of German resistance, and roads choked with both retreating enemy forces and advancing Allied convoys. Intelligence reports poured in with news of German regroupings, but Patton thrived on pressure. He believed that bold, decisive action was the only way to win, and he expected the world to notice. His diaries from the period reveal a commander obsessed not only with strategy, but with legacy, a man convinced that speed and audacity on the battlefield would translate directly into recognition. Despite the exhaustion of constant marches and the chaos of rapid advances, Patton maintained a personal flair that inspired his troops. His presence on the front lines, often mounted on horseback or inspecting positions in his trademarked polished boots, became legendary. Soldiers reported that even in the midst of relentless combat, Patton's energy was contagious. He would shout orders with a force that demanded both obedience and admiration. And yet there was always an undercurrent of something more personal, an expectation that the victories of the Third Army would be credited directly to him. It was during this relentless push that Patton's awareness of Montgomery's looming shadow became impossible to ignore. Radio transmissions and newspaper dispatches consistently highlighted Montgomery's meticulous operations, painting them as the cornerstone of Allied progress. To Patton, this felt like a personal slight, a theft of glory in real time. Every town he liberated, every German unit he shattered, seemed to slip into Montgomery's narrative of the campaign. He confided in aides, his frustration palpable, describing how the world's eyes were fixed on Montgomery's careful planning, while his own daring maneuvers went largely unheralded. The feeling of being overlooked festered, sharpening Patton's resolve. Amid these tensions, Patton's Third Army achieved feats that few had thought possible. In mere days, units would advance scores of miles, crossing rivers and neutralizing enemy strongpoints with an efficiency that seemed almost reckless to conservative commanders. His strategies often involved taking calculated risks that other generals would never consider, relying on speed, surprise, and relentless pressure. Reports of entire German divisions collapsing under the rapid onslaught began to circulate among Allied intelligence, yet press coverage remained stubbornly focused on British operations. It was in this climate of rapid success and simmering resentment that Patton's obsession with recognition took root.
He was no longer just a general fighting battles. He was a man vying for a legacy, measuring every mile advanced, every town liberated against the shadow cast by another commander. This chapter of the campaign was not just about strategy and logistics. It was a story of ambition, ego, and the human desire for acknowledgement. Patton's Third Army had become the embodiment of unstoppable force, yet its commander's greatest challenge might not be the Germans he faced on the battlefield, but the politics and perception of glory in the Allied command. As the summer sun blazed over northern France, the stage was set for confrontation. Patton's achievements were undeniable, yet the recognition he craved remained elusive. Every push forward, every victory earned carried with it a growing tension, a silent question of who would ultimately claim the glory. The Third Army surged onward, relentless and unstoppable, carrying with it not just the hopes of victory, but the ambitions of a man determined to be remembered, a man who believed that history would favor the bold.
While Patton's Third Army stormed across France with relentless speed, another figure loomed large on the Allied stage, British General Bernard Montgomery. Known as Monty to his troops and colleagues, Montgomery was the embodiment of meticulous planning and cautious strategy. Unlike Patton, whose victories came through daring maneuvers and audacious attacks, Montgomery preferred a methodical approach. He fortified positions, amassed overwhelming force before striking, and carefully orchestrated every movement to minimize casualties. To the high command and the press, this careful precision was reassuring. Headlines hailed Montgomery's operations as textbook examples of disciplined leadership, even when Patton's audacious advances were achieving results far faster and often more dramatically. Montgomery's rise in public perception created a growing tension that Patton could neither ignore nor accept. While Third Army units liberated towns, captured thousands of prisoners, and tore through German defensive lines, the accolades often went elsewhere. Patton felt as though he was fighting in the shadows of Monty's carefully crafted narrative. Supply convoys and reinforcements sometimes prioritized Montgomery's sectors, leaving Patton to improvise under immense pressure. His letters and diary entries reveal a man increasingly consumed by frustration. He wrote about the seeming injustice of it all, noting how speed and boldness on the battlefield were being overlooked in favor of carefully staged, slow-motion victories. This disparity was more than a personal grievance. It influenced strategy and morale. Patton's officers and men noticed their general's irritation. He spoke openly about the differences in leadership styles, contrasting his own rapid, high-risk advances with Montgomery's slower, more measured approach. While Monty planned every detail down to the last battalion, Patton thrived on the chaos of fast-moving operations. He believed that momentum was a weapon in itself, and that the ability to strike the enemy unpredictably would determine the outcome of the campaign. Yet even as his army succeeded spectacularly, Montgomery's name appeared more frequently in dispatches and newspapers. The rivalry was further intensified by the personalities involved. Montgomery was disciplined, polished, and media-savvy, projecting an image of calm authority. Patton, in contrast, was flamboyant, unpredictable, and often volatile, his temper and ego as visible as his military genius. These differences were magnified by the press, which often favored the orderly and composed British general. Soldiers and correspondents alike were captivated by Montgomery's speeches, his carefully staged press events, and the slow, steady progress of his campaigns. Meanwhile, Patton's audacious maneuvers, while devastating to the enemy, seemed almost too fast and chaotic for the media to fully appreciate. Despite the frustration, the Third Army continued to advance. Reports from the front described towns liberated in days, German units destroyed or forced into retreat, and supply lines stretched to the limit. Every success underscored the Third Army's effectiveness, yet the official narrative often seemed blind to it. Patton's letters to colleagues reveal a commander obsessed with recognition, carefully tallying the accomplishments of his units while noting which victories were credited to others.
He wrote with a mix of pride and indignation, documenting how Montgomery's methodical approach received the spotlight while his own daring moves were treated as footnotes. The tension between the two generals was not only professional but personal. Patton was fiercely competitive, convinced that battlefield success should translate directly to reputation and influence. Montgomery, with his measured approach and command of the public perception, seemed to embody everything Patton found infuriating: control, attention, and recognition that Patton believed was rightfully his. Within the corridors of Allied command, this rivalry quietly shaped decisions. Supplies, reinforcements, and strategic priorities were influenced not only by military necessity, but by perceptions of which general deserved to shine. By mid-1944, the stage was set for an inevitable confrontation. The contrast between Patton's speed and boldness and Montgomery's caution and polish had become a defining feature of the Allied campaign. Soldiers sensed it, correspondents reported it, and high command could not ignore it. Patton's frustration grew daily, a combustible mix of pride, ambition, and resentment. He believed in results above all else, yet recognition remained elusive. This dynamic set the scene for a clash that would not just determine personal prestige, but reveal fundamental differences in leadership style, military philosophy, and the politics of victory. As the Third Army thundered onward, Patton's mind was never far from Montgomery. Every radio report, every newspaper dispatch, every award ceremony where Monty was praised intensified his desire for confrontation. He wanted not only to win battles, but to claim his place in history, to ensure that his genius was recognized on the same scale as the victories he achieved. The rivalry was no longer about mere tactics. It had become a question of legacy, ambition, and the unspoken competition for glory that would eventually define both men and shape the narrative of the Allied advance through Europe.
By the middle of the summer of 1944, the simmering tension between General George S. Patton and General Bernard Montgomery had reached a boiling point. Both men were acutely aware of each other's accomplishments, yet neither was willing to concede superiority. Patton's Third Army had carved a path through northern France with astonishing speed, while Montgomery's methodical campaigns received the spotlight. When orders came for a coordination meeting between the two, it was more than just a routine discussion of troop movements. It was the collision of two very different worlds, a meeting charged with ego, ambition, and a silent war for recognition. The meeting took place in a modest Allied headquarters somewhere near the front, but the atmosphere was anything but ordinary. Patton arrived with his usual energy, boots polished, hat at a precise angle, radiating confidence and a barely contained impatience. Montgomery, by contrast, was deliberate and composed, every gesture measured, every word carefully chosen. As the two generals faced one another across the table, their contrasting styles were immediately apparent. Patton's fiery intensity met Montgomery's calm precision, and the air seemed to crackle with unspoken rivalry. Observers later recalled that even the room itself seemed to shrink under the weight of their presence. The conversation quickly turned to operational matters, but within minutes it veered into the terrain of pride and recognition. Patton, ever blunt and unafraid of confrontation, did not mince words. He outlined the astonishing gains of the Third Army, towns liberated, German units shattered, and advances made in mere days that some had considered impossible. He expected acknowledgement, perhaps even a nod of respect. Yet Montgomery listened with polite detachment, responding with measured points and corrections that only served to highlight his own meticulous planning. Every response seemed calculated to assert control, and Patton could feel the subtle slight in the air. The tension escalated as Patton pressed his case. He recounted the speed of his maneuvers, the audacity of his attacks, and the ingenuity required to maintain supply lines under relentless pressure.
Montgomery responded with careful explanations of his own operations, emphasizing coordination, caution, and the importance of minimizing Allied casualties. The contrast could not have been starker. Patton's victories were fueled by boldness and risk, Montgomery's by precision and prudence. Neither could deny the other's accomplishments, yet the underlying question lingered: whose triumphs would history remember most vividly? Eyewitnesses reported that Patton's voice, usually commanding, now carried an edge of frustration and disbelief. He gestured to maps, pointing out towns taken, roads seized, and enemy formations destroyed. Montgomery remained calm, occasionally interjecting with minor corrections, but never allowing the discussion to devolve into personal attacks. To him, this was not a battlefield argument, but a demonstration of control, a way to maintain authority even in the presence of a man as larger-than-life as Patton. The meeting lasted longer than anyone had anticipated, a crash not of armies, but of personalities, philosophies, and egos. Patton could feel his patience thinning, yet he also recognized the stakes. This was not merely a matter of pride, it was about influence, about how commanders would be remembered, and about who would shape the narrative of the Allied advance. Montgomery's composed demeanor only heightened Patton's urgency. Each word, each gesture seemed to underscore the very imbalance that had fueled months of frustration. By the end of the meeting, no formal resolution had been reached. Both men walked away with their positions intact, yet something had shifted. Patton's determination to secure recognition intensified, and Montgomery had confirmed, at least in his own mind, that careful planning and control of perception could be as powerful as speed and audacity on the battlefield. Historians later described the encounter as one of the most electric and revealing moments of the war, a meeting that illuminated the very different ways in which two brilliant generals approached leadership, victory, and legacy. For Patton, the encounter was both infuriating and galvanizing. He returned to his troops with renewed vigor, determined to prove through action what he could not achieve in dialogue. Every town liberated, every enemy division defeated became a testament to the power of speed and audacity. Yet he was now acutely aware that glory was not won solely on the battlefield. It was also a matter of perception, politics, and the ability to command attention. This realization would shape the remainder of the campaign, driving Patton to push harder, move faster, and take even greater risks, all in the hope that history would finally recognize the feats of the Third Army and the man who led it. After the tense confrontation between Patton and Montgomery, the battlefield victories of the Third Army did not lose their importance, but the question of credit began to dominate the corridors of Allied command. While Patton's men continued their astonishing advances, it became painfully clear that recognition in reports, awards, and headlines often went to Montgomery. The careful orchestration of media coverage and the conservative preference for methodical strategy meant that Montgomery's campaigns were easier to celebrate. Patton, who thrived on speed and audacity, saw the narrative slipping further from his grasp. High command decisions only fueled Patton's frustration. Supply convoys, reinforcements, and even political attention often prioritized Montgomery's forces, reinforcing the perception that careful planning was more valued than bold action. Meanwhile, Patton's operations, conducted at a breakneck pace, sometimes seemed too chaotic for traditional military bureaucracy. His generals and aides noted that the Third Army's brilliance on the battlefield was often overshadowed by Montgomery's ability to control perception, to ensure that every victory aligned with a carefully constructed story of disciplined progress. The disparity was not lost on Patton himself. In his personal diaries, he wrote candidly about feeling robbed of recognition. He described towns his army had liberated, enemy units destroyed, and breakthroughs achieved with near impossible speed, all of which were often minimized or framed as secondary to Montgomery's victories. To Patton, this was more than a professional slight, it was a personal affront. He believed that battlefield genius should translate directly into prestige, and he saw the system of awards, press coverage, and official dispatches as a constant reminder that influence sometimes mattered more than achievement. This tension also affected the troops and the morale within the Third Army. Soldiers were aware of their general's brilliance and his relentless drive, but they could see that the larger narrative rarely reflected their accomplishments. Patton's presence at the front lines, inspecting towns and personally engaging with units, served to keep spirits high. Yet, even among the men, there was an understanding that recognition was slipping through their fingers, funneled instead toward the polished and cautious figure of Montgomery. Many officers quietly sympathized, noting in their journals that Patton's audacity often achieved what seemed impossible, yet the spotlight rarely followed. Meanwhile, Montgomery continued to solidify his reputation, both in the media and within Allied command. His careful planning and ability to coordinate large-scale operations were celebrated, and he became a symbol of disciplined, controlled military strategy. Patton's audacious maneuvers, while impressive to those who witnessed them firsthand, were harder to capture in the conventional reports and photographs that defined public perception. The contrast between actual battlefield achievement and perceived accomplishment became increasingly stark, highlighting the role of politics and public relations in shaping history. The interplay of battlefield success and political maneuvering reached a critical point as awards and honors were distributed. Patton was recognized for his achievements, yet often in ways that seemed inadequate compared to the scale of his accomplishments. He would receive commendations, yet Montgomery's meticulous planning and high-profile victories were more widely celebrated, shaping the narrative of the Allied advance for both military and civilian audiences. This was not merely a matter of ego, it was a lesson in the power of perception, and one that Patton would carry with him throughout the remainder of the campaign. Despite these frustrations, Patton never slowed his advance. If anything, the lack of recognition fueled his determination. The Third Army continued to push relentlessly, capturing key positions, encircling enemy forces, and maintaining a pace that seemed impossible to sustain. Patton understood that while official accolades might be delayed or diverted, history could not ignore the results of his audacity and strategic brilliance. Every liberated town, every retreating German unit, every logistical triumph was a statement, a living proof of his methods and the effectiveness of his leadership. By the end of the summer, it was clear that the competition between Patton and Montgomery was not only about strategy, but about legacy. Patton's audacious actions reshaped the battlefield, while Montgomery's careful planning dominated the narrative. The interplay of speed versus caution, daring versus discipline, and battlefield results versus political recognition created a story that would define the Allied campaigns of 1944. For Patton, the lesson was bitter but undeniable. Glory in war was earned not only through victories, but through the ability to control how those victories were seen, recorded, and remembered. His frustration, however, became a driving force, pushing him to ensure that no success, no matter how small, went unnoticed or unclaimed.
By the late summer of 1944, the rivalry between Patton and Montgomery had left an indelible mark on the Allied campaign in Europe. Patton's Third Army had achieved feats of speed, audacity, and tactical brilliance that few generals could match, while Montgomery's carefully planned operations had won him wide recognition and public acclaim. Both men had undeniable successes, yet the contrast between achievement and recognition became the defining theme of their relationship. For Patton, it was no longer just a matter of winning battles. It was about ensuring that the story of his victories was told, understood, and remembered. Patton's legacy, however, was forged not only in the victories themselves, but in the intensity with which he led his men. Soldiers of the Third Army often recalled that Patton was as relentless in motivation as he was in strategy. He would visit forward positions, inspect towns, and ride with tank units through dangerous territory, his presence a constant reminder that audacity and speed could accomplish what seemed impossible. His leadership inspired confidence and fear in equal measure, and the Third Army's successes were a direct reflection of his style, aggressive, unyielding, and always forward-moving. Yet Patton's desire for recognition remained a central concern. He understood that history often remembered those who could control perception as much as those who achieved results. In private correspondence and diaries, he reflected on Montgomery's public acclaim and the way the press highlighted British victories, while the rapid, audacious advances of the Third Army were treated almost as an afterthought. Patton's frustration was deeply personal. He wanted the world to see the full scope of his army's accomplishments and the daring that had made them possible. This awareness drove him to push harder, take calculated risks, and innovate in ways that would leave an enduring mark on the battlefield. The rivalry also influenced strategic decisions. Patton's awareness of Montgomery's reputation sharpened his focus, compelling him to seize opportunities quickly and decisively. Every river crossed, every town liberated, every German unit forced into retreat became a statement, a counterpoint to the narrative that seemed to favor Monty's careful planning. Patton's audacity was both a military tactic and a personal strategy. By achieving results that were impossible to ignore, he could assert the significance of his contributions. In this way, the competition between the two generals became a driving force behind some of the most remarkable advances of the summer of 1944. Montgomery, for his part, maintained a composed demeanor that only heightened the contrast between the two men. While Patton charged forward with fiery intensity, Monty relied on precision, coordination, and the power of public perception. The press and Allied command were quick to celebrate his meticulous victories, reinforcing the narrative of disciplined British leadership. Patton, aware of this, accepted that recognition was not always proportional to achievement, yet he never ceased to fight for it, both on the battlefield and in the annals of history. As the war progressed, the rivalry came to symbolize broader themes of leadership and legacy. Patton's audacious methods demonstrated the value of speed, surprise, and risk in warfare, while Montgomery's careful planning highlighted the importance of coordination, preparation, and discipline. Both approaches were successful, yet the tension between them reflected the complex interplay of ego, ambition, and historical memory. For historians and military scholars, the contrast between the two men provides a vivid example of how personality and perception can shape both strategy and legacy. In the end, Patton's ambition and Montgomery's composure created a story that extended far beyond the battlefield. Patton's relentless drive ensured that the Third Army achieved feats few thought possible, while Montgomery's careful command secured public and political recognition. The rivalry demonstrated that victories in war are not measured solely in miles advanced or enemy units destroyed, but in the ability to shape how those victories are seen, remembered, and recorded. For Patton, every action, every maneuver, and every bold decision carried not only tactical significance, but the weight of a legacy he refused to leave to chance. By the close of the summer, it was clear that history would remember both men, though in very different ways. Patton's name became synonymous with audacity, speed, and relentless aggression, while Montgomery's became associated with careful planning, disciplined execution, and public acclaim. The rivalry between them left an enduring lesson.
In war, as in life, accomplishment and recognition do not always align, and the pursuit of glory can shape not only the actions of individuals, but the course of entire campaigns. The story of Patton and Montgomery remains a testament to ambition, rivalry, and the complex dynamics that define leadership, proving that even in victory, the battle for legacy can be just as intense as the battles fought on the ground.